Lecture 2. Lecture named The Atmospheric Air as Element of Biosphere and Hygienic Importance, the physical factor of the atmospheric air, the influence of the health of organism, the influence of complex meteorological factor on an organism, solar radiation and its importance for health, the concept about climate, weather, microclimate, acclimatization, seasonal and meteorotroph disease and their preventive. Biosphere. The biosphere is simply life on Earth, the sum total of all living things on Earth. Not only is the biosphere an integrated system with many components fit together in complex ways, but it also works in turn in concept with the other major Earth systems. But let's include the geosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere, for which circulated the chemical element and compost essential to life. Among these elements is carbon, a part of living things, which also trickle through the non-living realms of soil, water, and air. As for the compounds on which life depends, none is more important than water, which word it is the focal point of the hydrosphere passed through the various Earth systems as well. Organisms precipitate in the hydraulic cycle by providing moisture to wet air through the process of transpiration, and they likewise benefit from the downward movement of moisture in the form of precipitation. These and many other interactions make it easy to see why scientists speak of Earth as a system and even call it a living thing. Atmospheric air is one of the major components of ecology of the person. During the ability to live, the person constantly adjusts to many factors of an environment where he lives, and this factor naturally render an organism of the person with certain influence. One of such factors the person closely adjoining is the atmospheric air. Air is the most necessary component for existence of human organism. The air environment of globe named an atmosphere is stretched up to high about 1,000 kilometers above the surface of the ground. Property of an atmosphere at various heights is different, therefore is conditionally divided on some layers. The size of atmosphere is a quarter of the Earth's radius and absolutely necessary for existence of a living organism. The atmosphere has multi-layered structure and consists of troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, ionosphere, exosphere, and magnetosphere. Troposphere, up to 1240 kilometers. The most nearly adjoining to the surface of the ground refers to a troposphere and reaches up to height of 1240 kilometers. As against other more highly located layers, is characterized by a forlorn property. In troposphere, constantly there are daily and seasonal fluctuations of temperature. The troposphere is characterized by constant moving of air streams and even various directions: horizontal, turbulent, vertical. A troposphere constantly varies a significant amount of water streams, causing formation of different phenomena, include fogs and atmospheric precipitation. The troposphere is characterized by presence of a rather significant amount of extraneous impurity, foam, liquid, and gaseous pollution. In all overlying layers of an atmosphere, the temperature of air is always constant and does not vary depending on time of day or season of year. In air of these layers, horizontal moving airways prevail. There are no water pairs, and therefore the phenomena connected to them, clouds, fogs. No characteristic for troposphere externality, except for those insignificant pollution act on the ground from space dust, and also pollution which are deserted from the surface of the ground at some force, an explosion of a nuclear weapon and large eruption of volcanoes. Stratosphere. The troposphere is followed with a layer named a stratosphere, which reaches up to height about 100 km. In the stratosphere, basically, there are horizontal moving Earth's weight by virtual or wet pollution getting in stratosphere are distributed to a big distance and named global. The pollution getting in stratosphere have a number of features. By virtue of significant remoteness from the surface of the ground, we have a rather small weight, and therefore speed of subsidence of them is very insignificant. We are carried by horizontal streams of air on very big distance and practically dispersed above all terrestrial surface that has given the basis to name their global. This circumstance has played an essential role during the conclusion of the agreement on prohibition of tests of a nuclear weapon in an environment. Mesosphere, above a stratosphere, and reared on the high up to 80 km. Thermosphere is a layer above mesosphere and includes ionosphere. Its size depends on the season and day, making up 500-1,000 km, and exosphere up to 3,000 km. The temperature grows up way to a high of 200-300 km. Magnetosphere from 3,000 up to 50,000 km are the highest upper bound of Earth's atmosphere. The development of space science, started in the middle of last century, has demanded the study of influence of very distant atmosphere, like property on astronauts' health status to support their health in extreme conditions. It's fact that man can live without air in average only 5 minutes, when his organism inevitably dies, is the best evidence that air is the vitally important factor on human habitat. It's natural that for your usual life the greatest value has the troposphere, the nearest to the ground layer of an atmosphere. We must closely adjoin to air of troposphere, and its property render on us the most direct influence. Now I intensively study property of air weight of other layers, but for a human body they cannot directly influence as existence of the person in this layer. Result of dives with artificial condition is impossible. Air is necessary for maintenance of process of respiration and oxygen provision, thermal exchange, provision of body heat emission by different ways, transmission of optical portion of solar spectrum, visible, ultraviolet and infrared rays to Earth's surface, orientation in environmental space for sense organ perception of visual and acoustical signal of environment. Long-term period of interaction between man and air created adaptive mechanism of organism. Air has physical, chemical, biological, and mechanical property which can affect human organism, both favorable and adverse. Chemical property are caused by normal gas composition of air and injurious gas impurities. Mechanical property of air depend on the content of impurities of solid particles like dust, ash, smoke, soot, and other microorganisms as well. Physical property of air are the temperature, humidity, air velocity, atmosphere pressure, and electric condition, solar radiation, radioactivity, and electromagnetic waves. The climate and weather depend on physical property of air. Biological of air are depend on microorganisms and viruses. Some of physical factors influence on human organism in enclosed premises and is named as microclimate. Hygienic value of air temperature. The person has adapted to existence within the limits of a certain value of temperature. At the surface of the ground, the temperature of air, depending on breadth of district and the season of year change in limits about 100 degrees. With rise and higher the temperature of air is gradually reduced, approximately on 0.56 degree on every 100 meter of rise. This size refers to as a normal temperature gradient. However, by a virtue of special developed meteorological condition, low, overcast, a fog, this temperature gradient is sometimes broken, and there comes so-called temperature inversion when the top layer of air becomes warmer than lower. It has special value in the decision of a problem connected to pollution of atmospheric air. A course of temperature inversion reduces the opportunities for dilation of pollution throughout into the air and promotes creation of the higher concentration. For consideration of question of influence of temperature of air on an organism of a person, it's necessary to recall the basic mechanism of thermoregulation. One of the major conditions for normal ability to live of a human body is preservation of a constancy of a body temperature. Under usual conditions, the person of the average losses in day about 2,400 2,700 kilocalories. About 90% of this heat is given to an environment through the skin. The other of 10–50% are spent for heating food, drink, and inhaled air, and also on evaporation from a surface of mucous membrane of respiratory ways. Hence, the most important way of heat output is the surface of the body. From the surface of the body warmly is given as radiation, infrared radiation, convection by direct contact to surrounding subject, and adjoining to the surface of the body by a layer of air, and evaporation as sweat or other liquids. Occurrence of temperature inversion reduces the opportunities for dilation of pollution throughout into the air and promotes creation of the higher concentration. For consideration of questions of influence of temperature of air on an organism of a person, it's necessary to recollect the basic mechanism of thermoregulation. Thermoregulation, one of the major conditions for normal ability to live of a human body, is preservation of a constancy of a body temperature. The human organism has a perfect mechanism of chemical and physical thermoregulation. They allow him to adapt to different temperature conditions of environment and to survive significant temperature fluctuation without any problem for health. Chemical thermoregulation, production of body heat, is conducted by the oxidizing process. At high temperature, the oxidizing process is decreased and body heat production is diminished. At low temperature, the opposite is usually occurred. The human body temperature in any causes is stable. The physical thermoregulation provides increase or decrease of organism heat output from skin surface using the air. Usually it's released by next ways: radiation of heat equal 45% towards small cooled surface and subject, a wall's furniture. Convection 30% in layer heating of adjoining air. Evaporation of moisture equal 25% by sweating excretion. The essence of a physical thermoregulation. At high air temperature, the dermal vessels are extended. The temperature of the skin is raised. Then the sweating excretion is intensified. Heat output is also increased and organism is not overheated. At low air temperature, the dermal vessels are constricted. When the blood moves to the internal organ, the skin is cooled. When difference between skin and air temperature is diminished, and the heat output is also decreased. Therefore, if the man is not overcooled. However, resources of thermoregulation mechanism are limited, At very low and high air temperature, the organism can be unable to keep body temperature stability. Organism can be overcooled or overheat. Indoor air temperature is standardized, dependent on climate. In temperature, climate is within the 18-20 degree. In cold, 20-22 degree. In hot, 16-18 degree. Low temperature is the temperature lower than 50 degree. High temperature is the temperature over 25 degree. Convection: the rate of convective exchange between the skin of a person and the ambient air in close proximity to the skin is dictated by the difference in temperature between the air and the skin temperature together with the rate of air movement over the skin. When the air temperature is greater than the skin temperature, there will be gain in body heat from the surrounding air. Conversely, when the skin is warmer than the air temperature, there will be a loss of heat from the body, because warm air is less dense than cool air. The warm air will rise from the body and cool air will come in to take its place. This process is then repeated. The process is called convection. Radiation. The surface of the human body constantly emits heat in the form of electromagnetic waves. Simultaneously, all other dense objects are radiating heat. The rate of emission is determined by the absolute temperature of the radiating surface. Thus, if the surface of the body is warmer than the average of the various surfaces in the environment, net heat is lost, the rate being directly dependent on the temperature difference. This form of heat transfer does not require molecular contact with the warmer object. The sun is a powerful radiator and exposure to greatly decrease heat lost by radiation. When the temperature of the object in the environment exceeds skin temperature, radiated heat energy is absorbed from the environment. Under this condition, the only avenue for heat loss is by evaporative cooling. Conduction. The difference between heat loss by conduction and radiation is that with conduction the body must be in contact with the object. In such circumstances, the heat moves down its thermal gradient from the warmer to the cooler object, the heat energy being transferred from molecule to molecule. The warmer molecule slows down after it has lost some of its heat, and the cooler molecules move faster having gained heat. The temperature transfer continues until eventually the temperature of the two objects equals. The rate of the heat transfer through conduction depends on the difference in temperature between the two objects and the thermal conductivity of the two objects. Evaporation. When water evaporates from the surface of the skin, the heat required to transform it from a liquid to a gas is dissipated from the skin. This acts to cool the body. Evaporative heat loss occurs from the respiratory tract lining as well as from the skin. There is a continuous gradual loss of water from the skin that is not related to sweat glands. The skin is not fully waterproof, and so some water is lost out through pores in skin and lost by evaporation. This loss is not subject to physiological control and is intensive precipitation. Sweating is an active process requiring energy and controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. The rate at which this process proceeds can be controlled, and therefore the amount of the heat loss can be controlled. Radiation and convection are insufficient to prevent warming up of the body during heavy manual work or at high surrounding temperature. Under the circumstances, heat loss is added by evaporation of water. At environmental temperature above about 36 degrees, lost exclusively by evaporation. Temperature, heat is taken up while the body formed by radiation, conduction, and convection. Sweating then becomes profuse in order to maintain heat uptake and heat loss by action. In order to be effective, sweat must be emitted from the skin. If sweat manages on the surface of the skin or is whipped away, heat will be.
Summer's here and the Lone Star State's heating up. But did you know just standing out in the sun can make you sick? Most people don't realize it, but not only is the sun Mother Nature's heater, it can also act as her laser death ray. As the weather heats up, so do our bodies. And you sweat to cool yourself. You cool down as the sweat on your body evaporates. If the weather is hot and also humid, your sweat can't evaporate as well. This keeps your body's air conditioning from getting its thermostat low enough. Heat-related illnesses such as heat cramps, heat syncope, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke can occur when this happens. Doing a lot of strenuous activity outside can really work up a sweat. All this sweating depletes the body's salt and moisture levels. The low salt level causes cramping or heat cramps. These result in painful muscular spasms in the arms, legs, and abdomen. Be sure to drink plenty of fluids to help prevent heat cramps. After several days of exposure to high temperatures and inadequate fluids, heat exhaustion can develop. As people approach heat exhaustion, the skin may be cool and moist. The victim can be dizzy, thirsty, and weak. Their pulse rate will be fast and weak with fast and shallow breathing. Heat syncope causes a person to suddenly faint or pass out during activities in a hot environment. The body cools itself by increasing blood flow to the skin where heat is released. This shift of blood flow reduces the amount of blood flowing to the brain, which stops the brain from functioning, causing a person to faint. Many times, the skin gets pale, sweaty, and cool. Heat stroke is a true medical emergency that can be fatal if not properly and promptly treated. Normally, a person suffering from heat stroke experiences high body temperature, the absence of sweating, with hot red or flush dry skin, rapid pulse, difficulty breathing, strange behavior, hallucinations, confusion, agitation, disorientation, seizures, and or a coma. If you see someone suffering from a heat-related illness, get help quickly. Call for medical assistance. Only qualified medical staff can determine a further course of action. Cool the victim rapidly using whatever methods you can. Cooling the victim may prevent delirium or a coma. Some methods to try are removing clothing and bringing the victim into a shaded area. Immerse the victim in a tub of cool water. Place the person in a cool shower. Spray the victim with cool water from a garden hose. Sponge the person with cool water. Place ice packs in the armpits and groin. If the humidity is low, wrap the victim in a cool, wet sheet and fan him or her vigorously. If there is vomiting, make sure the airway remains open by turning the victim on his or her side. Until help arrives, you can have the victim lie down, apply a cold compress and elevate their feet. Use a fan if you have one to lower their temperature, and have the victim drink cool liquids if they are conscious and willing.
Thanks, guys. Now I'm much better equipped for this Texas heat. I have plenty of fluids to keep me hydrated. I've got sunscreen, a protective hat, protective eyewear. I'm sitting in the shade.
Remember to increase your fluid intake during extreme heat, especially if you're physically active. The CDC recommends 16 to 32 ounces of water for every hour you're exposed to hot weather, regardless of whether or not you feel thirsty. Stay away from sodas or sugary drinks, as they can actually dehydrate you. Sport drinks are great alternatives as they help you replenish the salt, minerals, and electrolytes you lose when you sweat. Wear appropriate clothing, lightweight, light-colored, and loose-fitting. And be sure to apply sunscreen. You need at least SPF 15 or higher to prevent sunburn and skin dehydration. If you must be outdoors, try to limit your activity to morning and evening hours. Just a little preparation keeps summer safe and enjoyable.
Hygienic value of air humidity. The air exposure to water vapor. Its quantity is permanently changed, it decrease or increase. A lot of water vapor is stored. The condition of moisture are worse. In air, such vapor can be stored, that is resilient liquid that evaporates, and the evaporation depends on temperature of air. The absence of evaporation are found in harder. Vapor goes after temperature of air. Temperature of is increased, the evaporation is increased also. The evaporation is lowered also. Humidity is moisture content. The atmosphere always contains some moisture in water. The maximum amount depends on the temperature. The amount of vapor that will saturate the air increases with temperature rise. When the atmosphere is saturated with water, the level of discomfort of perspiration with its a cooling effect is impossible. The next kind of air humidity are distinguished. Absolute humidity is the quantity of the water vapors per unit volume of air at present time. Maximal humidity is the quantity of the water vapors which saves the unit volume of air at the temperature of measuring. Maximal humidity is measured in the same units. Relative air humidity is the ratio of absolute humidity to maximum evaluated in percentage. The relative humidity has the greatest hygienic value because of only the relative humidity demonstrates saturation rate over air by water vapors. The normal relative humidity is the humidity of 30–70%. Some other physical concepts have practical value also. Deficiency of saturation, physiological deficiency of saturation, and dew point. The air humidity can be described as deficit of saturation. The deficit of saturation is a difference between maximum and absolute humidity at same temperature. Together with it, there is also concept a physiological deficit of saturation. It difference between maximum damp at the temperature of body of the person, 36.5 degree, and absolute humidity of air. Dew point, temperature, when the absolute air humidity is maximum. Air humidity influence on organism thermal exchange depends on air temperature, increase or decrease. At low temperature, in most air the feeling of cold is stronger than in dry air at the same temperature. It's by outcome the most air has large heat conductivity and thermal capacity. For the same reason, it wet clothes is much more cooled. Pores of tissue change with moisture and as well carries out heat. Human body permanently loses moisture, easily by water vapor or by liquid water. It's established that is quick condition room temperature. The person loses by skin approximately 20% of moisture, milk 50%, remaining part urine and feces. Therefore, in this condition, approximately 35% of water is lost by evaporation and 65% in a liquid with feces and urine. By activity and heat of air, in the contrary, 60% of water is lost by evaporation from skin and milk and much less by urine and feces. Influence of high humidity. The humidity over 70% is considered as high. At high air humidity and temperature, body heat output by radiation and convection is strongly complicated because of decrease of difference between skin and environmental temperature. In such conditions, the organism can get overheat. The air is saturated by water vapors, and because of it, the sweating excretion is complicated. Then profuse sweating excretion, the visible drops of sweat on skin, is ensuing. It not promotes the heat output, especially because in such conditions, the radiation and convection are blocked. At high air humidity and the low air temperature, the body heat output is enlarged by convection. It's explained over the high thermal capacity and thermal conductivity of common air. In damp air, the clothing becomes wet and loses its warm keeping function. Breathing and long stay in damp cool premise has injurious effect on organism. This effect is apparent as immunity weakening and inflammatory disease of peripheral nervous system, neuritis, laxitis, radiculitis. Also, humid air worsens total sanitary condition of environment, makes for fogging and microorganisms surviving, decrease natural illumination. In a number of causes, it makes for domestic inconveniences, like furniture decay, papers detachment, and moldy growing. Thus, the high air humidity both at low and high temperature has adverse influence on human organism and his habitat. Prophylaxis of high humidity in premises include action against high air humidity in premises, observation of hygienic norm and standard of AQ for one person, installation of ventilation and heating system, humid coats of building walls from subsoil water, and prohibition to exude any kind of work production of damp. On the level of industrial production, the action for high air humidity prevention alone, coating of the technological process to decrease or water vapor quantity in air or working area, rationalizes the ventilation system to eliminate water vapors or working area air, and installation of rationalized system of heat. Influence of the low humidity or humidity below 30%. The low air humidity at high temperature makes for organism heat output by intensive sweating excretion. So in this condition, the organism is not overheated. At low temperature body heat, output is decreased because of dry and cool air is a bad thermal conductivity. So in this condition, the organism is not overcooled. Dry cool air is considered as the most healthy air. Thus, human organism withstands temperature overload of dry air better and easier than wet air. The dry air allows of using in for climatherapy on climatic health results. Adverse influence of dry air in indicated early at air humidity below 20%. In this case, dry air has drying up effect on mucosa of nose, pharynx, oral cavity, and the upper airways. Induced infected and inflamed caps appearance. In premises very dry air can affect adversely. The furniture is cracked and burst. Leather goods are dried up and twisted, and fresh bread gets stale quickly. Hygienic value of air velocity and direction. Air velocity in atmosphere is defined by direction and rate of movement. The direction of air is defined by the Cartesian points from which the wind blows, and the rate of air movement is defined by the distance which air moves in unit of times, meter secondary. Change of air direction is an index of weather change. It should be taken into account of appropriate clothing choice for overheat or overcool prophylaxis. It's also very important to know of prevalent wind direction in the area. It's necessary if populated area planning, because all the hospitals, child institute, premises due to be situated in windward side relative to industrial enterprises. The industrial enterprises can be a source of air pollution. For finding out of prevalent wind direction where windrows is produced. Where windrows is a graphic presentation of frequency in percent of different wind direction points during the year in local populated area. The rate of air movement first of all affects on organism thermal exchange, and metabolism, and also on process of external respiration, physical expenditure of energy, and condition of physiological sphere. Influence of air rate on thermal exchange is affected in heat output, increased through convection and evaporation. If air temperature is higher than body temperature and air is saturated by water vapors, so the air movement does not give cooling effect. In case of low air humidity, the cooling effect of moving air, despite the high temperature, is conserved. The perception of heat by organism depends on temperature. At high temperature, the thermal state of health is improved due to air velocity and a sense of cool is appeared. Wherefore, in condition of high temperature, the air velocity is estimated as favorable factor. At low temperature, the thermal state of health is worsened. The thermolysis is intensified and sense of cold is increased. Therefore, in condition of low temperature, air velocity is estimated as unfavorable factor. Air velocity, wind, intensifies metabolism. The heat production is raised in process of temperature decrease and air rate increase. The strong crosswind can put obstacles in the way of respiration because it is needed to give to expired air the rate higher than the wind rate. So the normal respiration process is impaired. The inhalation becomes passive and an exhalation active. The strong fair wind also makes it difficult of inhalation in the face of man. The pressure of wind can mechanically cut obstacles in the way of movements and exclusion of physical operation because the physical losses of energy is raised. The coordination of movement is become worsened. It's necessary to take into account in execution of certain kind of operation and sports. Influence of wind on psychological sphere of the man can be significant. It's now that thermally neutral wind has invigorative effect. Strong and long-term wind can be caused as of psychic excitement as depression. In summer season, air velocity rate in the range of 1 metasecondary, and in premises 0.2–0.4 metasecondary is considered as favorable condition. Hygienic value of atmosphere pressure. Apparently from the previous statement of a material, the layer of air above a terrestrial surface is disturbed up to height about 1,000 km. This air is kept at the surface of the ground by force of terrestrial gravitation, has a certain weight on the surface of the ground and on all subjects which are taking place at the surface. This air creates the pressure equal of 1,035 grams quadrat centimeter. Hence, upon all surface of a body of a person having the area of 1.6–1.8 quadrat meter, with air accordingly pass pressure about 16–18 tons. Usually we do not feel it, as under the same pressure gases are dissolved over liquids and fabrics of an organism, and from within counterbalance external pressure upon a surface of a body. However, a change of external atmospheric pressure by virtue of weather condition, the equilibration of it from within needs some time necessary for raise or reduction of amount of gases dissolved in an organism. During this time, the person can feel some feeling of discomfort. As a change of atmospheric pressure for 1 millimeter of column, the general pressure upon a surface of a body change on tens kilograms. Especially feel this change people suffering as chronic disease of the bone muscular, cardiovascular system. Besides, the person can meet the change of barometric pressure during the activity. at risk on high, at diving, casting works. Therefore, it's necessary for doctor to know what influence renders on an organism as downturn and increase of atmospheric pressure. Influence of the lowered pressure. The person meets the lowered pressure mainly at risk on higher, at excursion in mountains or the use of flying device. Thus, a major factor which influences the person's oxygen insufficiency, which increase in high atmospheric pressure is gradually reduced, approximately on 1 millimeter mercurial point on each 10 meter of higher. At high of 6 kilometers, atmospheric pressure is already twice lower than on sea level and at high of 16 kilometers in 10 times. For percentage of oxygen in atmospheric air, as we have noted yearly, which a reason on high does not vary amount. However, in connection with reduction in the general pressure, the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. The share of pressure which is provided due to oxygen in the general pressure. It appears that exactly the partial pressure of oxygen provides transition diffusion of oxygen from alveolar air in venous blood. More rarely, this transition occurs due to a difference of the partial pressure of oxygen in venous blood and in alveolar air. This difference also refers as diffusion pressure. At small diffusion pressure, they get the hypoxemia, which is a major factor of development of high altitude and mountain illness. The symptom of the illness is rhizosemia, to the symptom of the general oxygen insufficiency described by as early dyspnea, palpitation, pale skin integument, and acrocyanosis, dizziness, weakness, fast fatigue, sleepiness, nausea, vomiting, loss of consciousness. It's possible to get mountain or altitude disease on the high of 2.53 kilometers. For this disease prevention, the next prophylaxis measures are needed. Training in pressure chamber with low atmospheric pressure and using of oxygen apparatus, lifting on depending on the partial pressure of oxygen in air at different height, distinguished with a long zone, on a degree of influence on an organism or the person. Naturally, the division into such zone in condition as different people differently transfer oxygen insufficiency. The big role thus is played a degree of organism training. A trained people activity of compensatory mechanism is improved. The quantity of the circulating blood, hemoglobin, and erythrocytes in increased tissue adaptation is improved. The reduction of barometric pressure at risk or higher result in excess of oxygen insufficiency, other disturbance in the condition of an organism. First of all, it is decompensating disturbance expressed in expansion of gases taking place in natural cavity of an organism, additional bosoms of a nose, the average air, badly sealed up these gases in intestine. Thus, there can be the pain sometimes reaching great strength. These phenomena are especially dangerous and shaft pressure decrease. For example, dehermetization of cabins of plants. In such case, there can be damage of lung, intestine, nasal bleeding. The decrease of pressure up to 47 mm mercurial point and low at high of 19 km result so that liquids in an organism begin to boil at a body temperature as pressure becomes low when pressure of water steams at this temperature. Is expressed in occurrence so-called hypodermic emphysema. Influence of high atmospheric pressure. The divers and the workers who excuse casing operation, this kind of work are carried out at great depths under effect of water column. who builds foundation for bridges, underwater tunnels, underground and others. Diver works in special diving suits. The compressed air is forced there. Its pressure must be equal to pressure of water column from its surface up to depth of diving. Dipping on every 10 meters means to pressure increase approximately on 1 atmosphere. Its special construction caissons, intended for caisson operation. It's for excavation. The caisson consists of a reinforced concrete chamber sunk to the bottom. The metal milling pipe is installed from above of aperture in chamber ceiling and the sluice apparatus at the top of the milling pipe. Casing chamber is opened from bottom and compressed air is forced away with pressure up to 4 atmosphere. It's necessary to force out the water and to create the needed condition for excavation. Before sinking into casing chamber and coming out of it, workers have to pass through the sluice apparatus. The pressure in sluice apparatus is gradually increased to the level of casing chamber pressure or gradually reduced to normal pressure level after work completion. In process of casing sinking, a milling pipe is increased and simultaneously the other casing pack, bridge leg, is raised on the ceiling of casing. Effect of higher atmospheric pressure on the workers lead to trouble of respiration, to emergency of sense of compression, and each air drum is pressed in, and to infrequent pulse. Shift time usually is normalized according to rate of pressure. At 3.5, 3.9 atmosphere, it is could fill 2 hours 40 minutes. It's required to be careful in transition from the area of high pressure casing to normal condition. This moment is extremely dangerous. Superfluous quantity of the nitrogen soluted in blood and tissue fluids, especially in the fat tissue and its substantial alba, cannot have enough. It can stay as gas bubble and can be spread by blood and can cause embolism. Embolism leads to vessels occlusion. Depending on localization of embolus and duration of tissue nourishment, disturbance of the different manifestation of casing disease, acute pains in joints, muscles of extremis and stomach, a monoplegia, a paraplegia are apparent. Gas embolism can lead to a rupture of the smallest arterial with hemorrhages dangerous to human life. For prophylaxis of a casing disease, the duration of stay underwater on some depths is limited, or nitrogen can be substituted for any other gases, helium, argon, because they have a good solubility in blood. If preventive measures are not absorbed, the high atmospheric pressure is able to cause a strong physiological alteration in human organism and to turn to pathological character. Thus, measurement of barometric pressure have a big practical value to characterize of atmospheric condition. These measurements are also important for weather forecasts and for determination of air humidity and content of gases.
Decompression illness, DCI, encompasses 2 diseases, decompression sickness, DCS, and arterial gas embolism, AGE. DCS is thought to result from bubbles growing in tissue and causing local damage. DCS most commonly refers to a specific type of scuba diving hazard, but may be experienced in other depressurization events, such as flying in unpressurized aircraft and extravehicular activity from spacecraft. Bubbles forming in or near joints are the presumed cause of the joint pain of a classical bend. When high levels of bubbles occur, complex reactions can take place in the body, usually in the spinal cord or brain. Signs of DCS include skin shows a blotchy rash, muscle weakness, joint pain, collapse, and fatigue. Treatment is by hyperbaric oxygen therapy in a recompression chamber, which slowly recompressurizes the body so that the bubbles may be removed. If treatment early, there is a significant higher chance of successful recovery. Deep, long dives, exercise at depth, or after dive will decrease the chances of DCS occurring. Exposure to altitude or flying too soon after dive also increases the risk of decompression sickness. AGE results from bubbles entering the lung circulation, traveling through the arteries and causing tissue damage at a distance by blocking blood flow at the small vessel level. This usually happens when diver surfaces without exhaling. Air trapped in lungs expands with ascent and may rupture lung tissue, called pulmonary barotrauma, which releases gas bubbles into the arterial circulation. This distributes them to the body tissues in proportion to the blood flow. Since the brain receives the highest proportion of blood flow, it is the main target organ, where bubbles may interrupt circulation if they become lodged in small arteries. To prevent AGE and DCS, make sure to exhale when surfacing and always surface at slow, constant rate.
Man needs constant body temperature for providing normal functioning of organism and uppermost thermoregulatory nucleus, at which optimal enzyme or oxidizing restoration reaction function as a result of optimal speed of exchange process is made. Human organism exchange heat with an environment. The thermal balance of an organism is set by condition of adequate regulation of process of physical thermoregulation, heat loss to thermal medium by convection, conduction, radiation, sweat evaporation, and chemical thermoregulation, heat production in human organism. Health state and age of man. His psychological state happens of the physical load change requirement to indices of microclimate. It's necessary to reduce air temperature for patients with pathological or gland thyroid. Meanwhile, higher temperature necessary to set for patients with burns, infant as well as for patients in naked state. Intensive physical load should fulfill in an adequate microclimate which is characterized by low temperature for providing optimal condition for excess heat loss. The physical parameter of air complex influence of the human organism and causes overheating and overcooling. Overheating occurs usually at a high temperature in combination to high humidity. The higher temperature at dry air is transferred more easily because thus the significant part of heat is given by way of evaporation. At evaporation of 1 gram of sweat, it spends about 0.6 kilocalories, especially when heat output occurs if it is accompanied by movement of air. Then evaporation occurs most intensively. However, if the high temperature of air is accompanied by high humidity, evaporation from the surface of a body will occur insufficiently intensively or will add or be stopped. In this case, heat output will not occur, and warmth will start to collect in an organism, where will be an overheating. Distinguish two display of overheating: hyperthermia and convulsive illness. At hyperthermia, distinguish three degrees: easy, moderate, and heavy heat stroke. Convulsive illness arises because of sharp disease in blood and tissue of an organism, of chlorides which are lost at intensive precipitation. Overcooling. The low temperature to a combination with low relative humidity and small velocity of movement of air the person is transferred rather well. However, the low temperature in combination to high humidity and velocity of movement of air create the opportunities for occurrence of overcooling. By virtue of the big heat conductivity of water, in 28 times more air, and its big thermal capacity in conditions of crowded air heat output by conduction sharply rises. This is promoted by the raised velocity of movement of air. Overcooling can be the general and local. The general overcooling promotes occurrence of cold and infection disease owing to reduction of the general resistance of an organism. Local overcooling can lead to a shiver and frostbite, and mainly extremity. As local cooling can take place and reflects a rising reaction in other organs and systems. Thus, become clear that high humidity of air plays a negative role in questions of thermoregulation both at high and at low temperature, and the increase in velocity of movement of air as a rule promotes heat output. Exception is may reach causes when the temperature of air is higher than a body temperature and relative humidity reach 100%. In this case, increase of velocity of movement of air will not lead to the increase of heat output both the way of evaporation, way of conduction. Solar radiation and its importance for health, biological and hygienic meaning. Stream of radiant energy of the sun is electromagnetic fluctuation with various lengths and waves measured in micron. The atmosphere transmits over Earth's surface only optical part of solar spectrum. The optical part of solar spectrum include invisible ultraviolet beams, visible light beams, and invisible infrared beams. At the Earth's surface, the ultraviolet part is just only 1%, visible 30%, and the infrared beams 59%. The intensity of solar radiation depends on the height of the sun above the horizon, transparency of the atmosphere, the ozone layer. Keeping at intermediate position between the UV and infrared, visible rays have a specific effect on eyesight, for which were an adequate stimulus. The photosensitive cell's eyes accept and convert the energy of light, leaving the body receive the necessary information about the state of the environment. Moreover, they provide heat, softer energy, and general biological effect on the skin. It's well known that there is a defined correlation of biological rhythm and the rhythm of the solar radiation. Organs live according to the internal clock. Clear dynamic stereotype is produced in human. Visible rays act on the whole body tonic. It should be implicit effect on the body as a function of wavelength. Red rays approach its effect to the infrared, producing thermal effect. They increase the excitability of the nervous system, stimulate the activity of the pituitary gland and other endocrine glands. So, Jeffries did not provide that the red and orange rays of sunlight stimulate the sex glands, causing the accelerated maturation of the gonads. Violet rays are met with a chemical action from tan. For the visible rays, sunburn effect need more energy than UV radiation. The most natural color is green. People over the century of evolution and development was surrounded by greenery. Other colors will stimulate or depress the nervous system. Red and yellow color have an invigorating effect and give the impression of warm tones. Bexley recommended that people with mental stimulation place in the chamber blue and mental oppression in the chamber with pink walls. Infrared radiation. Herschel discovered infrared in 1800. The main action, the heat. Life in the earth. The proportion of the infrared radiation of the sun in the general flow is increased by reducing the high of it on the horizon. Infrared radiation consists of a short, up to 1.5 micron, and long, more 1.5 micron paths. Long infrared rays trapped mainly in the epidermis of the skin and cause heating of a surface receptor, irritate, burning. Infrared erythema produced by the expansion of the skin capillaries diffuse without clear boundaries. Short infrared penetrate to a depth of 2.54 cm, produce deep heating and subjective feeling of significantly less. Currently, most researchers recognize not only heat, but also the photochemical action of infrared rays on the body. The absorbing infrared rays of blood protein and activation of enzymatic process. The general effects of the infrared rays, heating with the formation of severe diffuse erythema, with the release of a number of physiologically active substances, acetylcholine, which enter the general circulation and cause adjustment of metabolic process in remote place of exposure tissue and organ. The general reaction is expressed in the body in the redistribution of blood vessels, increase in the number of eosinophils in the peripheral blood, increase the total resistance of the organism. Effect on the central nervous system, particularly on the vegetative nervous system. There is a decrease in sympathetic tone, accordingly dystonia. Action of the cardiovascular system and other organs. Under the influence of infrared rays absorbed, a blood redistribution, increased heat rate, increase in the maximum and minimum reduction in blood pressure, increased body temperature, increased sweating. Reflex increases heat generation in other organs, stimulates kidney function, relaxes muscles. The result is the acceleration of regenerative process, reduction of pain. Action on organ of vision. It has established experimentally that passes through the eyes 27% of the total radiant energy flux. The most common lesion is a cataract clouding of the lens. This disease is more often found in professional and glassblowers, rolling works plants. The special role of infrared radiation in the heat exchange. It should be remembered that the man himself in the infrared rays emitter 5-15 microns. Man losses in the heat radiation approximately 45% of the heat. On the one hand, when supercooling of the skin when the body emits infrared rays. The condition for appearance of disease, a furunculosis, rheumatism, colds. On the other hand, is possible hyperthermia, heat stroke, burns. Moderate use of solar radiation of infrared rays plays thermoregulatory mechanism. Ultraviolet rays. Ultraviolet rays Ritter first opened in 1801. They have the highest biological activity and require special attention because under restriction or deprivation of UV exposure develop pathological process known as light starvation or ultraviolet failure. Under natural conditions, a major source of UV radiation is the sun, which is the spectrum to Earth's surface reach only a passing wave band, which is associated with the absorption of waste in ozone and oxygen in the atmosphere long range. The biological effect of ultraviolet radiation, area A, wavelengths 400-320, erythemal and sunburn action. Area B, wavelengths 320-290, vitamin D generating action. And area C, wavelengths 290-200, 180, bactericidal abiotic effect. The overall biological effect consists in formation in organism of bioactive substance by photochemical reaction. This substance stimulates protein, plants and mineral metabolism and immune system, strengthening and toning up of organism. Mechanism action of UV radiation: biophysical, humoral, neuroreflex. Biophysical: activation of biochemical process, ion structure change. Humoral: generation of bioactive substance, histamine. Neuroreflex: irritating of skin nerve ending under histamine effect. The UV radiation effect on human organism: biogenic and abiogenic. Biogenic: healthy, fortifying, health-giving, erythema, sunburn, vitamin D formation. Abiogenic: unhealthy, burns, photodermatosis, cancerogenic action, photoallergy, phototoxicosis, keratoconjunctivitis, photokeratitis. The direct effect of UV radiation on cells of a living organism associated with the complex and the photochemical process primarily with damaging effect on the living cells and denaturation of protein. As a result of physical effect of UV rays in the skin occurs, a losing of protein burns in the cell fragment and the appearance of protein molecules. Cellular enzyme including eliminate damaged proteins, accumulating products of cellular decay followed by the release of histamine and histamine-like substance. Local reaction: UV erythema, aseptic inflammation with all the attributes that characterize an inflammation: redness, pain, swelling, and even dysfunction and fever. The process appearance of erythema complex, despite the fact that this local response is not possible without the occurrence of the nervous system. An experiment was conducted. Test Novocaine blockade has been made, then carried out for irradiation with UV rays. Erythema did not arise. Histology. Histology mechanism formation of erythema. After 1-3 hour period required for the accumulation of the above substance in the skin, swelling of cell, a slight increase in vessel lumen, the number of layers of the epidermis is not increased, these are changing the cell nucleus. After 6 hours, thickened epidermis, swelling of cell and increase of layers, appear edema and leukocyte infiltration of the skin. After 24 hours, the epidermis is much thickened. Thickening of the stratum cornea, the nucleus of cells swell followed by vacuolization and keratexis. The number of leukocytosis increased sharply. This is an acute period of development erythema. The activity of the body armed and overcoming the damaging effect of UV radiation. After 72 hours, take the normal form of cell, the epidermis is thickened, there is pigmentation. This residual effect of one-side erythema serves as an example of adaptation to the effect of UV rays. Summarizing effect of UV radiation: increased metabolic and enzymatic process, improving the tone of the central nervous system and stimulating effect on the sympathetic nervous system, increased immunobiological reactivity of the organism, change in the activity of the endocrine system, the specific formation of vitamin D, celebrating increase the body resistance on the action of ionizing radiation, bactericidal action. Biological effect of UV rays. A comparison of the action spectra for killing of bacterial cells with the absorption spectra shows that the bactericidal effect involves nucleic acid, chromosomal aberration, gen mutation, sister chromatid change, and cell transformation are biological effects that have been studied under various exposure conditions with cultural of human cells. A publication of the International Agency for Research on Cancer fully discusses the implication of this observation for carcinogenicity in human beings. Study using human skin, fibroblasts exposed to stimulate sunlight give result consist with the supposition that lesion induced by sunlight represent a mixture of DNA damage, cellular responses, and repair mechanism. Mutation resulting from errors in repair may predispose to cancer. According to International Agency for Research on Cancer, there is sufficient evidence for solar radiation as the cause of malignant melanoma and other types of skin cancer in human beings. UV radiation from the sun evidently induced the three common forms of skin cancer: basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and cutaneous malignant melanoma. Basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma are the most common form of skin cancer and exceed the total all other neoplasms in many sunny countries, particularly among outdoor workers. Other factors than change in the ozone layer, however, are more significant at present. Effect of UV radiation on the immune system. In animals, exposure to UV beams cause change in the immune system, mainly by suppressing normal immune response that is important in the development of cancer and the cause of infection disease. The exposure of human skin to UV radiation impairs the function of antigen-presenting cells normally resident in the epidermis. These cells are capable of activating T lymphocytes, which may be involved in preventing the development of contact dermatitis and the immune surveillance of certain types of skin cancer. Biological effect of UV radiation on the eyes. UV radiation is probably a major cause of cataract, which are more common in tropical or sunny climate than in temperate regions. The mechanism of the damage involves the initial absorption of UV beams by the protein of the ocular lens. A 1% decrease in the ozone layer has been estimated to result in 1–2% increase in the incidence of cortical cataracts. Effect on the ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem. Modern studies indicate that UV radiation can penetrate water to a sufficient depth up to 50 meters for ecological effect to occur. UV beams damage phytoplankton in the laboratory and probably in the marine.
The skin uses sunlight to help manufacture vitamin D, which is important for normal bone formation. But there's a downside. The sun's ultraviolet light can cause major damage to the skin. The outer layer of the skin has cells that contain the pigment melanin. Melanin protects skin from the sun's ultraviolet rays. These can burn the skin and reduce its elasticity, leading to premature aging. People tan because sunlight causes the skin to produce more melanin and darken. The tan fades when new cells move to the surface and the tan cells are sloughed off. Some sunlight can be good as long as you have proper protection from overexposure. But too much ultraviolet or UV exposure can cause sunburn. The UV rays penetrate outer skin layers and hit the deeper layers of the skin, where they can damage or kill skin cells. People, especially those who don't have much melanin and who sunburn easily, should protect themselves. You can protect yourself by covering sensitive areas, wearing sunblock, limiting total exposure time, and avoiding the sun between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Frequent exposure to ultraviolet rays over many years is the chief cause of skin cancer, and skin cancer should not be taken lightly. Check your skin regularly for suspicious growths or other skin changes. Early detection and treatment are key in the successful treatment of skin cancer.
Effect of UV radiation on the terrestrial plants and animals. The influence of UV radiation on plants varies between both species and cultivars of a species. Plants' responses include photorepair, accumulation of UV-absorbing pigments, and growth delay. Many important crops, including soybean and cereals, such as barley, oats, and maize, are particularly sensitive to UV radiation. The mechanism for this effect is not well understood, but they are due, at least in part, to the impairment of photosynthesis. Effect of UV radiation on the materials. Photochemical degradation, especially by UV radiation, adversely affects wood, plastic, paints, and textiles. Many people are in condition of insufficient irradiation, or as we say, the sun or the light starvation. At most, it relates to a UV insufficiency. Moreover, there is a large contingent of people who are regularly deprived of natural light. This includes workers of the coal, the mining industry, workers of undergrounds, workers of windowless or without lamps production, residents of large city. In the city, the lack of sunlight linked to air pollution by dust, smoke, gases, the lining mainly ultraviolet portion of the solar spectrum. According to researcher Kulichkova, in sunburn, loss of UV radiation 23%, in the city 26-42%. The penetration of UV rays deep into the room accompanied by a sharp decrease in radiation intensity. In the southern orientation on the intensity of the windows inside the room depends on the depth of the room. Even these were windows open on the window sill, 51% of the initial UV intensity, the flow of UV rays, at a distance of 1 meter is reduced by 20-25%. At a distance of 1.5 meter is only 5-8% of the incident flux of UV radiation. Double glazing reduces the amount of ultraviolet rays in 5-6 times, and the base window glass does not transmit UV rays shorter than 310 nanometer. UV glass passes rays with a wavelength to 254.4 nanometer. There are two approaches: the elimination of ultraviolet radiation deficiency, maximum use of natural UV radiation, the use of artificial source in the special room photary. Climate. Concept about climate, influence of climate of human organism. Climate is an average state of meteorological condition of given area during long-term observation, or its sufficiently statistically stable meteorological condition in the concrete geographical area. Meteorological condition or climatological factor are temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure of air, direction and force of wind, solar radiation, nebulosity, atmospheric precipitate, and electric state of atmosphere. Number of climatic zone of Earth on geographical winds and middle annual temperature air 7. Number of climate zone of Earth by Berg's classification 12. Number of climate zone in Azerbaijan 8. Medical type of climate: sparring, Treatment: tempering and irradiating. Spotty climate is a warm climate with small fluctuation of temperature and other meteorological factors during day, month, and year. This kind of climate makes minimal demands to adaptive physiological mechanism of human organism. As example of this kind of climate, forest climate of Russian middle zone or climate of south coast of Crimea. Irritating climate is a climate with significant daily and seasonal fluctuation of meteorological factor. So this kind of climate makes maximum demands to adaptive mechanism. As example of this kind of climate is a cold climate of north, mountain climate, desert and steppe climate. The characteristic of this climate makes for appearance of a thermoregulation and hemodynamic tension, basal metabolism intensification, gastric hypersecretion, change in nervous system such as intensification of inhibitory process, negative mental reaction, reduction of conditioned reflex activity, degradation of work capacity, sleep disorders. Low air temperature in combination with high humidity and high air motion are resulted to inflammatory disease, rheumatism, peripheral nervous system disease as radiculite, neuritis, myalgia, myasthenia. Treatment: tempering, type of climate, of using of climate condition in medicine, strengthening the organism, treatment and prophylaxis of some disease. In medical practice is described to make medical weather forecast on the basis of this classification and to undertake corresponding preventive measures. Next, concept about weather. Weather is average state of meteorological condition in given locality during the short period of observation, hours, days, week. Is in contrast to climate where weather in unstable condition of meteorological parameter because of the weather can be changed several times per day. In stream of heat air, the cyclone is formed. Cyclone is an area of decreased pressure with diameter about 2.53 thousand kilometers. At the same time, decreased pressure is moved from periphery to center. Weather in cyclone is unstable and is characterized by temperature, pressure, humidity drops, by atmospheric precipitate and high electric conductivity. In stream of a cool air, the anticyclone is formed with diameter of 7,000 kilometers. It brings a stable weather, but not always a fire weather. The weather has direct or indirect influence on people. The direct influence of the weather is developed as influence on thermal exchange. So hot and wilderness weather is combination with high air humidity can bring to overheat in the form of heat stroke. The weather with low temperature, high humidity and air motion can bring to overcool organism in the form of frostbite, and this from freezing, decrease of immunity, growth of chill degrees, and others. Also, the weather influence of the infection disease. It's known that hot weather is favorite to develop of enteric infection and to growth of number of food poison. The indirect influence of the weather is related to aperiodic variation of the weather, which change the rhythm of physiological function of organism. The different diseases related to seasonal exacerbation or to more serious development of disease can be initiated. Stomach and duodenal ulcer, some mental disease, manic, depressive, psychosis, and cardiovascular disease. The sizable change of weather can negatively affect on health state of some people. Such people are named as meteolabile, meteosensible, or meteopathic people. The number of such people is varied and depends on age, kind of pathology, and type of hair nervous activity. Unfavorable change of the weather are the cause of a periodic heliometeotropic reaction, sometimes with risk for life. The heliometeotropic reaction has not a clear symptom complex and is not as nosology unit. Its character and manifestation depend on kind of pathology, initial health state of organism, type of physical activity. In a majority, the meteorological people complain on health state worsening, sleep disorders, dizziness, sizable fluctuation of blood pressure, heat pains, feel of anxiety, degrees of work capacity, and fatigability. It's proven now the negative influence of unfavorable weather on disease cause of cardiovascular, respiration, digestive and nervous system, on skin and ophthalmic disease and growth of traumatism, automobile accidents, vaginas and suicides. Meteorological reaction almost at 70% of cardiovascular patients, deterioration of condition on time coincides with the period of significant change of meteorological condition. Similar connection is made also by many researches which have been carried out practically in all climate geographical regions as our country and abroad. The sensitivity to unfavorable weather differ also people suffering chronic non-specific disease of lung. Such patients badly transfer weather to high humidity, sharp temperature drops, and strong wind. Connection with weather of current of disease is rather expressed by a bronchial asthma. It finds a reflection even in non-uniformity of geographical distribution of the given disease, which means in areas a damp climate and contrast change of weather is more often. So, for example, in northeastern areas, in mountainous districts, and in the source of Central Asia disease, a bronchial asthma in 2-3 times is lower than in the Baltic country. The increased sensitivity to the weather condition and their change in patients with rheumatic disease is well known also. Occurrence of rheumatic pains in the joints, previous or accompanying change of the weather began one of classical examples of meteotropic reaction. There are data on influence of weather condition on surgical practice. It's made in particular rapid adverse weather current and an outcome of a post-operative period at cardiovascular and other patients worsens. There are some kind of classification of types of weather, more simple of which is classification on federal. According to this classification distinguish 3 types of weather: optimal, irradiating, and sharp. Optimal, intraday fluctuation of temperature up to 2 degrees, air velocity up to 3 meters secondary, change of atmospheric pressure up to 4 mm mercury point. Irradiating, fluctuation of temperature up to 4 degrees, air velocity up to 9 meters secondary, change of atmospheric pressure up to 8 mm mercury point. And sharp type of weather, fluctuation of temperature more 4 degrees, air velocity more than 9 meters secondary, change of atmospheric pressure more than 6 mm mercury point. Next, microclimate or concept about microclimate, hygienic meaning. Microclimate is a meteorological condition in the work zone, which is characterized by complex of factors that act on organism of people, its temperature, humidity, and rate movement of air, and also radiation, temperature, and warm radiation. Microclimate defines heat state of an organism. Microclimate is influenced by latitude, topography, human activity, and vegetation, as well as other factors. Sometimes we mean microclimate as variation of the climate within a given area, usually influenced by hills, hollows, structure, or proximity to body of water. Acclimatization is adaptation of human organism to new climatic condition. Under abrupt change of usual climate, organism can experience disorders in functioning of different systems. The human organism has different physiological mechanisms supporting to adapt himself to new unusual climatic conditions over a more or less long period of time. Depending on adaptation to any climate, the organism uses different physiological mechanisms. Thus, acclimatization to hot climate is resulted in reaction from the next system: cardiovascular, bradycardia, decrease of blood pressure on 15-25 mm mercury point, respiratory system, decrease of respiration rate, excretory system, distribution of skin fat is more equal, sweat secretion is more intense and equal without profuse sweat. As a result, the decrease of basal metabolism on 10-15% and body temperature are taking place. Acclimatization to cold, severe and polar climate or to low temperature is resulted in intensity of basal metabolism and heat production, increase of circular blood volume, and the skin temperature is restored quicker. Rational clothing and footwear, dwelling and nutrition make easier the process of acclimatization, personal hygiene, cushioning, and training. Thus, acclimatization to hot climates is resulted in reaction from the next system: cardiovascular, bradycardia, decrease of blood pressure on 15-25 mm mercury point, respiratory system, decrease of respiration rate, excretory system, distribution of skin fat is more equal, sweat secretion is more intense and equal without profuse sweat. The degrees of basal metabolism on 10-15% and body temperature are taking place. Acclimatization to cold, severe and polar climate or to low temperature is resulted in intensity of basal metabolism and heat production, increase of circular blood volume, and the skin temperature is restored quicker. Rational clothing and footwear, dwelling and nutrition make easier the process of the acclimatization, personal hygiene, cushioning, and training. Thank you, attention.